The private jet glimmered like a silver arrow beneath the warm afternoon sun, its polished exterior casting mirrored reflections across the tarmac as a light breeze rippled the air. Everything about this aircraft screamed exclusivity, from the gold-etched logo near the entry stairs to the subtle scent of imported leather and orchids that greeted passengers the moment they stepped aboard. Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary designed for the elite. White leather seats that reclined into beds, burnished gold accents along the window trims, personalized screens on each seatback, and a serene atmosphere filled with ambient jazz and hushed conversations. Passengers strolled in confidently, most wearing designer sunglasses even indoors, their luggage silent and sleek as it glided across the hand-woven Persian carpets. Champagne flutes clinked softly in manicured hands, while murmurs of business deals and exotic getaways mingled with the low hum of the engines. Among them was Naomi Williams, who stepped aboard not like someone who belonged there, but like someone who owned the space, though she made no effort to announce it. She was in her late 30s, statuesque and composed, dressed in a navy blue blazer cut so perfectly it whispered power without arrogance. Her pants matched in tone and precision, her heels modest but polished, and her natural hair pulled back in a sleek, elegant bun. No flashy jewelry, no visible brand labels, no need to prove anything to anyone. Yet the calm intensity of her presence commanded attention more than diamonds ever could. Naomi walked with measured steps, eyes scanning the cabin not out of awe, but assessment, as though every detail mattered and every person aboard was part of a quiet test. As she moved down the aisle, she passed Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, a well-known couple in high society, him with his neatly folded newspaper and her with her yarn and knitting needles already at work before takeoff. They greeted Lauren, the lead flight attendant, with warm familiarity. Lauren beamed at them with practiced charm, her smile glowing with the reverence reserved for returning VIPs. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond," she said with sugary brightness. "We've got your favorite seat and champagne ready." The couple nodded, settled in, and returned to their rituals with ease. But when Naomi approached, Lauren's demeanor shifted subtly yet unmistakably. The smile dropped a fraction. Her tone cooled. "Welcome aboard," she said, the warmth notably absent. She didn't offer her a drink, didn't ask if she needed help finding her seat, didn't even glance long enough to pretend she cared. Naomi noticed, but said nothing. Instead, she gave a nod, moved toward her assigned seat at the front of the plane, and gently placed her satchel underneath. She sat down smoothly, unbothered, and pulled out a sleek leather-bound notebook. The hum of conversation continued around her, but her mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just another flight for Naomi. This was an undercover journey, an intentional test of her airline's culture. As the CEO and majority owner of the luxury brand, she had booked this flight under a different name, anonymously, to see how the staff truly treated passengers when they thought no one important was watching. Her empire had grown faster than anyone expected. Private aviation, luxury hospitality, and now international expansion. But growth meant she had to know if the integrity of her brand extended beyond boardrooms and glossy marketing. Lauren, meanwhile, continued down the aisle, clipboard in hand, inspecting each passenger like a headmistress in a prep school. She operated with the pride of someone who believed she alone maintained order here, but it was a twisted version of order, one built on assumptions. She gave radiant smiles to the wealthy retirees, the powerful businessmen, and the elegantly loud socialites. But for Naomi, she spared only passing glances. Her idea of service came with conditions. When she returned moments later and noticed Naomi, still seated in the front, Lauren paused beside her, clipboard clutched tightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said with a forced smile. Her voice dipped in saccharine. "I think you may be in the wrong seat. This section is reserved for elite passengers." Naomi looked up slowly, her eyes calm and precise. "This is my seat," she replied evenly. Lauren tilted her head, pretending confusion. "Are you sure?" "Because," she trailed off, letting the insinuation settle like fog. Naomi didn't blink. "I suggest you check the passenger list." Lauren stiffened. I don't need to check, she said firmly. I know who belongs here. Around them, passengers began to notice, eyes flickering with interest, some in discomfort. The atmosphere subtly shifted as the silent question echoed among them. What made Lauren so sure Naomi didn't belong? The tension that now gripped the luxurious cabin was no longer a quiet undercurrent. It was electric, vibrating beneath every polite whisper and sideways glance. Naomi sat still, poised like a queen in exile, her chin slightly raised and her posture unbothered by the invisible weight Lauren tried to press upon her. Lauren, the lead flight attendant whose polished exterior masked a festering superiority complex, stood squarely before her, arms folded now, like a sentry protecting a border only she imagined existed. I'm going to ask you one more time, Lauren said louder now, her voice carrying to the far end of the cabin. Either you move to the back of the plane, or I call security. There was a bite in her voice, a strain that betrayed how much Naomi's refusal to submit rattled her. Passengers began to take sides in silence. The businessman across the aisle furrowed his brow, glancing from Naomi to Lauren with growing concern. The socialite in the aisle seat leaned toward her companion with eager anticipation, whispering, "She's clearly trying to sneak into first class," as though this were a soap opera and not a real-life humiliation unfolding in front of her. Naomi's calm hadn't wavered once. Her eyes never flinched. Her voice remained level, but the steel behind it could have cut through titanium. "I've already told you," she said, her tone almost gentle but unmistakably strong. "I'm not moving." Lauren scoffed. The dismissal in her body language was unmistakable. She turned sharply to her junior flight attendant, Grace, a woman in her mid-20s, fresh-faced and still wide-eyed in the unforgiving world of luxury aviation. "Grace," Lauren snapped, "escort this woman to the back now." Grace froze mid-step. Her hand hovered near the seat back, her eyes darting from Naomi to Lauren. Something inside her twisted, the conflict between obedience and justice. She had been watching since the moment Naomi stepped aboard. She saw the warmth drain from Lauren's smile, the way her voice dropped cold the second she faced Naomi. And now this. This was beyond a mistake. This was targeted humiliation. "Maybe we should just," Grace began timidly, her voice soft. She said this as her seat. "Maybe we should check." Lauren's glare sliced through the rest of her sentence. "I said escort her. Don't question me." Grace stepped back, swallowing hard, shame flushing her cheeks. Naomi watched the exchange with calm understanding. She'd seen it before. Good people silenced by fear. She didn't blame Grace yet. Instead, she reached down and picked up her phone. With steady fingers, she typed a short message and placed the phone back on her armrest. It was a quiet move, subtle, but it sent an unmistakable shift through the energy around her. Lauren's eyes narrowed. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, irritation creeping into her tone. Naomi simply looked up. "You'll find out soon enough." That calm, that poise, it made Lauren feel like the floor beneath her was starting to give way. Naomi didn't have to raise her voice. Her quiet presence was like a slow wave rising behind a dam. The passengers felt it too. Something was off. Something didn't fit the narrative Lauren was selling. The businessman leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on the aisle armrest beside Naomi's seat. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. Naomi nodded graciously. "Thank you," she said. "I'm fine." Lauren immediately bristled. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage this kind of disruption," she snapped, her eyes flashing. The businessman didn't flinch. "From where I'm sitting," he said plainly, "you're the only one causing a scene." A ripple of murmurs followed. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing a line had been crossed, even if they weren't ready to say it aloud. Lauren's voice rose again. "You are out of line," she barked at Naomi. "You're not supposed to be here. And now you're making a spectacle of yourself." Naomi's response was almost a whisper. "All I've asked for is to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." Then came the moment that cracked the illusion of order completely. Lauren stepped back, flustered, and made a theatrical pivot down the aisle. She grabbed a tray of drinks and returned with her shoulders squared, pretending to carry out her duties. But her hands shook, and her frustration boiled over when she noticed Naomi had stretched her leg slightly into the aisle to adjust. Rather than politely asking her to move, Lauren deliberately walked into her leg, knocking the tray forward. Glasses clattered. Water splashed across Naomi's lap. Gasps echoed in the cabin. "Watch where you're putting your legs." Lauren snapped, as though she were the one wronged. Naomi sat back, brushing water from her slacks with a quiet dignity. "You walked into me," she said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp enough to cut through the lie. "And if asking for respect is too much, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words didn't rise above a normal speaking tone, but their weight was undeniable. They silenced the entire cabin. Lauren's face burned crimson, her fists clenched, and then, in one final, shocking moment of rage, she did the unthinkable. She slapped Naomi across the face. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Silence followed, cold and absolute. The slap hung in the air like a thunderclap, its echo vibrating through the cabin louder than the jet engines themselves. For a moment, time froze. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every sip of champagne halted. Every breath held in suspension. Naomi didn't flinch. Her head turned slightly from the impact, but when she straightened again, her expression was composed, calm, even serene. The red mark forming on her cheek stood in stark contrast to the power in her gaze, a gaze that did not waver, did not break, did not give Lauren the satisfaction of seeing a reaction. The cabin was silent. Passengers sat motionless, stunned, as the reality of what they'd witnessed crashed into them. The businessman across the aisle stood halfway, his eyes wide with disbelief. The nosy socialite, who moments earlier had whispered accusations into the air, now shrank back into her seat, her face pale and stunned. Grace, the young flight attendant, stood near the galley with both hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Naomi adjusted herself in her seat, smoothing her damp slacks with slow, deliberate movements. When she finally spoke, her voice was a razor wrapped in velvet. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," she said softly. Lauren stood there breathing hard, her hand still raised as if frozen in the aftermath of her own rage. Her expression flickered, first smugness, then uncertainty, and finally a slow, creeping dread. Naomi had not yelled, had not retaliated, had not even raised her voice, and yet the room felt colder, heavier, as if a great shift had taken place. Passengers exchanged glances, confusion turning to discomfort, discomfort sliding into guilt. Naomi didn't need to raise her voice to shift the balance of power in the room. Her silence was thunderous. Lauren tried to recover. "You think you can talk to me like that?" She spat, but the words sounded empty now, hollow and cracking under the weight of what she had just done. Naomi leaned forward, her hands calmly folded in her lap, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "You've crossed a line," she said, "and the consequences of that line will follow you far beyond this flight." Lauren scoffed, but it lacked conviction. She could feel it, that something was wrong, that something about Naomi didn't fit the mold she had built in her head. "What are you going to do?" Lauren sneered, though her voice cracked slightly. "Call the police?" Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was not weakness. It was calculation. It was control. And that terrified Lauren more than any outburst could have. Then, quietly, Grace moved. She took one step back into the galley, pulled out her phone, and quickly made a call. Her fingers trembled, but her voice was steady. "It's Grace," she whispered. "We have a situation. A serious one." A few moments later, the cockpit door opened, and the pilot emerged. He was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the weight of responsibility carved into his brow. He walked with a purpose that immediately shifted the energy of the room. He glanced around the cabin once, his eyes landing on Lauren, then on Naomi. "Ms. Reed," he said, addressing Lauren with polite professionalism that barely masked urgency, "I need you to step aside immediately." Lauren blinked, her mouth slightly open. "What? No, I'm handling this." The pilot's voice grew firmer. "No, you're not. We just received a call from headquarters. The owner of this aircraft is on board, Miss Naomi Williams. The words struck like lightning. A collective gasp erupted from the cabin. Passengers turned their heads in unison, some leaning forward to get a better look at the woman who had sat silently among them all this time. The nosy socialite audibly gasped, her perfectly glossed lips parting in disbelief. "She owns the plane," she whispered. The businessman simply nodded, as if a puzzle had just clicked into place. "I knew it," he murmured. "I could feel it." Lauren's knees almost buckled. She staggered a step back, color draining from her face, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "That can't be true," she stammered. "There must be a mistake." She didn't say anything. The pilot's jaw clenched. "No mistake. And there's more. You didn't just insult the owner of the plane. You assaulted her. In front of over a dozen witnesses." Lauren turned to Naomi, who now slowly stood. Her movements were composed, deliberate, like a storm rolling in over still water. Naomi adjusted her blazer, then looked around the cabin, addressing everyone with a voice that was calm, measured, but impossible to ignore. "I'm Naomi Williams," she said, "CEO and majority owner of this airline. I was traveling anonymously today to see how our staff treated our passengers when no one was watching." Her gaze turned to Lauren. "And now, unfortunately, everyone is watching." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of judgment, realization, and the quiet shame of having witnessed injustice and doing nothing. But Naomi wasn't finished, and Lauren's reckoning had only begun. The moment Naomi finished speaking, the cabin transformed. What was once silent unease now became a flood of stunned recognition. The expressions on passengers' faces shifted. Shame washed over some, astonishment over others. The businessman exhaled slowly, as though a tension he didn't even realize he'd been holding finally released. The nosy socialite, who had leaned in with judgment earlier, now leaned back in her seat, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. Grace, standing behind the beverage cart, looked down with a mixture of vindication and dread, knowing the full weight of what she'd witnessed would now be addressed at last. But it was Lauren whose world crumbled in real time. Her knees wobbled, her throat felt tight, her hands, so quick to point blame minutes earlier, now dangled uselessly by her sides. Her face was pale, her mouth dry, and her thoughts raced wildly, looking for any way to make this go away. But there wasn't one. Naomi had revealed not just her identity, but the power behind her silence. The strength that had unsettled Lauren from the beginning now made sense. She hadn't just misjudged a passenger. She had humiliated, assaulted, and tried to eject the owner of the airline from her own plane. Naomi stepped forward, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was calm, measured, but carried the unmistakable weight of judgment. "Lauren," she said, her voice cutting through the thick silence, "your behavior today was not only unprofessional, it was cruel, biased, and disgraceful. You humiliated a passenger. You lied. You used your authority to oppress instead of serve. And worst of all, you struck someone who had done nothing but ask for respect." Lauren opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her voice, once so sharp and dominant, now caught in her throat. I didn't know," she whispered. "If I had known who you were—" Naomi raised a hand, stopping her cold. "That's exactly the problem," she said. "You didn't know who I was, and so you assumed I was no one. But respect isn't something you reserve for the powerful. It's the baseline you offer every person who steps onto this plane." There was a murmur of agreement from several passengers. Mr. Raymond nodded slowly, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision, while Mrs. Raymond set down her knitting and looked toward Lauren with narrowed eyes. "You've embarrassed this company, this flight, and every passenger who had to sit through your abuse of power," Naomi continued. "You've made people uncomfortable when your job is to make them feel welcome, and now there are consequences." She turned to the pilot. "Captain, please ensure that this matter is reported directly to HR and the board. I want a full transcript of this flight's incident report on my desk by the end of the day. And in the meantime," she turned back to Lauren, whose lips trembled as her last reserves of control began to slip. Effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties. You are no longer employed with this airline. The words fell like a final gavel strike in a courtroom. Lauren gasped, stumbling backward a step. Please, Miss Williams. I was under pressure. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to get caught, Naomi replied, her voice cool and sharp. But you did. And now you will face the consequences. The door to the aircraft opened as two uniformed officers boarded. Their presence was professional and quiet, but unmistakably firm. One of them stepped forward. Miss Williams, we received your report. Are you pressing charges? Naomi didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. This individual struck me in front of multiple witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable for her actions. Lauren stepped back, trembling now, her defiance reduced to desperation. No, please. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean it. Please don't do this. The officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault, he said in a voice both calm and final. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The rest of the Miranda warning faded beneath Lauren's whimpers as her wrists were cuffed behind her back. She was escorted down the aisle she once strutted with power, now walking a gauntlet of silent, disappointed stares. Her arrogance had vanished, replaced by a broken fragility. Her head bowed, her career, reputation, and freedom slipping through her fingers. Naomi stood still as the officers led Lauren away, her face calm, her stance resolute. She turned to face the rest of the cabin, her voice warm but firm. To everyone here, she said, I'm truly sorry for what you had to witness today. This is not the kind of service or environment I expect on any aircraft under my name. We are taking immediate steps to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. The passengers nodded. Then, one by one, they began to clap. It started with Mr. Raymond, then the businessman, then the socialite. A ripple of applause swept through the cabin, not just in support of Naomi's authority, but in gratitude for her integrity. Naomi's eyes flicked to Grace, the junior attendant who had tried to speak up. Grace, she said, her voice softer now. Thank you for showing professionalism and restraint in a difficult moment. My office will be in touch about a formal commendation. Grace's eyes welled up, and she nodded, overcome with emotion. Thank you, Miss Williams, she whispered. As Naomi moved toward the front of the plane, passengers watched with newfound respect. The mood had shifted completely, from discomfort and confusion to awe and quiet reverence. Justice had taken flight that day, and its pilot had never raised her voice once. As the cabin door closed behind the officers escorting Lauren off the plane, a hush fell once again, but this time it wasn't one born from tension or fear. It was reverence. Naomi stood tall near the front of the aircraft, her calm presence now fully understood, no longer misread as passivity, but recognized for what it was, a strength, true strength. She looked out over the cabin, where passengers sat in stunned silence. They had just witnessed a moment not many ever see. The very instant prejudice collided with power and lost. But what made it unforgettable wasn't just the consequences Lauren faced. It was how Naomi had faced it all, with grace, control, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Naomi walked slowly back to her seat, her assistants already waiting at the steps outside, having been alerted by the pilot after the emergency landing. One of them stepped forward into the cabin, carrying a leather folder with documents for review, but paused at the sight of the applauding passengers. Everything is ready, Miss Williams, he said gently. Naomi nodded and turned back to the passengers, addressing them one last time. What happened here today wasn't just about me, she began, her voice steady and resonant. It was about every person who has ever been looked down upon because of how they look, what they wear, or how quietly they carry themselves. Prejudice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it smiles while asking for your boarding pass. But when we allow it to grow unchecked, it poisons everything, from our workplaces to our skies. The businessman leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You've changed how I see things," he said softly. Others nodded. Some still seemed to be processing the moment. Mrs. Raymond clutched her knitting bag a little tighter. Even the nosy socialite had tears brimming in her eyes. Naomi turned to Grace, who stood respectfully nearby, still visibly shaken, but holding her ground. "This airline is only as good as the people who run it," Naomi continued. "Today, you showed more character and courage than someone with far more authority. You could have stayed silent. You could have followed orders. But you paused. You thought for yourself. That's what leadership looks like." Grace's cheeks flushed with emotion. "Thank you, Miss Williams. I just wanted to do the right thing." Naomi smiled gently. "And you did. You'll be hearing from my office. You've earned more than just my thanks." The passengers clapped again, not as a formality, but as a show of solidarity. It was no longer about first class versus coach, titles versus uniforms, or appearances versus assumptions. In that moment, they were simply people who had shared something real, an awakening, a reckoning, reset. Naomi turned and made her way off the aircraft. The heat of the tarmac greeted her, but so did something else, a sense of resolution. As she stepped into the sleek black SUV waiting for her, her assistant briefed her quickly on her next destination, but Naomi's mind was still on the cabin she'd just left. The door closed behind her, but the story didn't. News spread like wildfire. The incident was caught on video. Passengers had recorded every word, every slap, every moment of that slow unraveling of bias. Within hours, it was trending. Within days, it was headline news. Naomi sat in a television studio for an exclusive interview, her presence calm but commanding as ever. The interviewer leaned forward, captivated. "Miss Williams, millions have seen your story. What message do you want people to take away from what happened?" Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Respect is a right, not a reward," she said. "It's not based on the seat you're in, the color of your skin, or how quietly you carry yourself. We all deserve dignity." The interviewer nodded. "And to those watching who've experienced similar mistreatment?" Naomi's tone softened, but her message remained firm. "Remember who you are. Remember that your worth isn't defined by how others see you. If someone mistreats you, it says more about them than it ever will about you. Stand your ground, even if your voice shakes, even if you're alone, because eventually, truth finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it's undeniable." The clip went viral. Comments poured in from around the world. People who had been denied jobs, seats, promotions, or even basic decency simply because of who they were. Naomi's story gave them more than outrage. It gave them hope. In the weeks that followed, Naomi implemented sweeping changes across her airline. Diversity training became mandatory. Anonymous reviews from undercover passengers were introduced. And most importantly, every employee was reminded of the company's core value, respect above all. 1 month later, Naomi boarded another flight, this time to attend an international conference on ethical leadership. The crew didn't just greet her, they celebrated her. The lead flight attendant approached her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. It's an honor to serve you today." Naomi nodded warmly. "Thank you," she replied. As she settled into her seat, the sky opened up before her, stretching endlessly through the window. But this time, it wasn't just the view that brought her peace. It was the knowledge that she had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement. She hadn't just demanded justice. She'd modeled it. As the engines roared and the plane rose into the clouds, Naomi looked out at the horizon and smiled, not for the power she held, but for the change she sparked. Her quiet strength had shaken a system and reminded the world that the highest form of luxury wasn't leather seats or champagne. It was dignity, and that, she knew, could never be upgraded, because it was never optional in the first place.